You are listening to Meet the Thriller Author, the podcast where I interview writers of mysteries, thrillers, and suspense books. I am your host, Alan Peterson, and this is episode number 156. In this episode of the podcast, we'll be meeting Jeffrey James Higgins, who is a former reporter and retired supervisory special agent with the DEA, now writing thriller novels. His debut novel, Furious, Sailing into Terror, was published on May 20th. We'll get to the interview here in just a moment, but before I want to let you know about Pro Writing Aid. If you're a writer, you should really go check out Pro Writing Aid. I tried all of the proofreading, editing, AI type tools out there, and in my opinion, Pro Writing Aid is the best one for fiction writers. I use it every day and even bought a lifetime license a few years ago. And Pro Writing Aid integrates very nicely with Word, Google Docs, Chrome, and Scrivener. And I love using Pro Writing Aid and the Scrivener integration. It's really fantastic. And I actually recorded a video showing you how I edit my latest manuscript using the Pro Writing Aid and Scrivener integration. So if you're curious about that, you can check that out at thrillingreads.com/PWA156. And listeners to the podcast get a 20% discount code by using my link at thrillingreads.com/PWA20. And the discount will automatically be applied once you click on that link at thrillingreads.com/PWA20. And that, of course, is a great way to support the podcast. So I really appreciate it. So to watch my video with the Scrivener and Pro Writing Aid integration, go check out thrillingreads.com/PWA156. Or if you just want to go get the 20% discount, you can go straight to the Pro Writing Aid site at thrillingreads.com/PWA20. All right, here's my interview with Jeffrey James Higgins. Hi, everybody. This is Alan with Meet the Thriller Author. And on the podcast today, I have Jeffrey James Higgins, who is a former reporter and a retired supervisory special agent with the DEA. And now he's a thriller author. His debut novel, Furious, Sailing into Terror, was published on May 20th. So I'm excited to talk to Jeffrey. Welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thanks, Alan. It's really a pleasure to be here. I've been a fan of your podcast for a couple of years now. You've got so many great guests on the show. It's an honor to be one of them. And I think it's your enthusiasm. You know, you can really feel your love of writing that comes out. It's so cool when writers and editors and agents get together and talk. You know, we all have this passion. So it's so much fun.
Oh, great. Thank you, Dan. Thank you so much. Yeah, and your background is amazing. You're like out in the world battling narco-terrorism, and now you're writing novels. What was that transition like for you?
Oh, I always saw myself as a writer. I was writing books when I was 6 years old, and making cardboard covers and coloring in pictures, anthropomorphizing animals on adventures and things. So like my whole life, I thought of myself as a writer, and I sort of stumbled into law enforcement. I was between reporter jobs. I worked as a newspaper reporter for a while because people told me, like my parents, you're never going to be able to make it alone as a writer. So, get a job as a reporter or something. So I did the kind of writing adjacent profession for a while. And I was between jobs, and I ended up taking a position as a private investigator because I thought, wow, this would be great fodder for books, Mm-hmm. And I started meeting all these people whose lifelong dream was to be in law enforcement. And I ended up becoming a deputy sheriff in the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office down in Florida, which was a really exciting job, saving lives and helping people and really doing important work. And then I went to DEA. And that turned into over 20 years with DEA, where I was mostly focused on terrorism groups and transnational crime. And so I was all over the world, for a long, long time. I was traveling a couple weeks a month for probably 12 or 13 years. And I spent a lot of time in Afghanistan and the Middle East and, just all over the world. I used to go to Thailand like every other month. So it was different, but in my heart, I was always a writer. So I guess that's a really long answer to to tell you, but so it was a transition. I felt like I was coming home. Like I loved my job. I loved the work I did in law enforcement, but writing is what I love. It's my passion. And if something were to happen to me before I could have published a few books, I think it would have been terrible.
So that was like the catalyst for you. Once you retired, you're like, now I'm going to do this, what I really wanted to do all this time.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't want to downplay. I loved my time in law enforcement. Yeah. I mean, I was involved with the first narco-terrorism case. We arrested and then convicted the first narco-terrorist, and so we helped change laws. We arrested a lot of terrorists over the years, and these transnational criminals that are just doing horrible things and weapons trafficking. I arrested and convicted a guy who was working for the Iranians trying to buy surface-to-air missiles. So there was lots of good stuff. I arrested the world's most prolific heroin trafficker. Or actually, I convicted him. I did the case, and then he was picked up later by the Afghan government, and then brought here, and I did the trial when he came back. But so it's good stuff. Like, it's stuff that I really enjoyed. But writing is really my passion, and so it's I feel so fortunate to have been able to do something that was exciting. It really kind of started as a bit of a lark and turned into this incredible 25-year career, and now I'm doing the thing that I always intended to do. So I'm really, really fortunate.
And were you a fan of thrillers and mysteries as a reader before you started to write your own?
Yeah, always. Even as a kid, like my favorite book was Treasure Island. Robert Louis Stevenson. And I remember I had a Jack London book. It's Call of the Wild, and a bunch of his other like novellas and stories and things I used to love. So like even as a very, very young kid, I did the Hardy Boys and all those types of mysteries that a lot of us grew up on. But I always enjoyed thrillers and the Tom Clancy and Robert Ludlum and, when that kind of brand of techno and military thriller came in, it really sucked me into.
Yeah, it's so fascinating. I've interviewed a lot of writers, and seems like all, including myself, with Nancy Drew, the Hardy Boys. That's like the beginning for like so many people. It's amazing how much influence those books have had on people.
Yeah, it's incredible. I've heard so many people say the same thing. And I was an only child for 7 years. And I think that's what probably led to my love of reading so much. But I remember, a new Hardy Boys book would come out, and I'd grab it and find a place to hide and curl up someplace and read, just devour the book in one sitting, And I still do that when I find books that I really love.
And so Furious, Sailing into Terror, that's your debut novel, right?
That's right. Yeah, I wrote one before it, which will end Unseen, Evil Lurks Among Us is the subtitle. And that's coming out in August. That was actually my first novel, but Furious was my second one. I wrote it for NaNoWriMo back in 2018. And Black Rose Writing is publishing it, or published it, and on May 20th was the launch. And it's actually done really well. I've been, it's a smaller press, Black Rose Writing, and I mean they're great, but they don't have the distribution of like a big five, and so and nobody knows who I am, so it's hard to get the word out there. But it was like yesterday, it was number 4 in horror suspense on Amazon. And it's been a number 1, number 2, or number 3 release in several different categories since it launched. So it's just it's exciting to see your name next to like Dean Koontz and Stephen King, these masters.
Yeah. I just was looking at it now on Amazon just before a little research. And I see it's already you got the Amazon Orange number 1 new release tags on it. So that's pretty exciting.
Yeah, that's fun. I mean, it's especially because I've had these stories kind of bottled up in me, right? Like not these specifically, but just stories in general. And it's so much fun to have people reading it, and especially people I don't know. I've run these my publisher's running Amazon ads, and I've run Facebook ads, and I get these readers who I've never heard of before who find my story through these Facebook ads, and then they're commenting and they're saying these wonderful things, and it's almost addictive. Like I have to go back and keep checking the ads to read the comments, and I've been trying to reply to all of them, but it's so much fun to think that the story that I crafted in my office, kind of secluded and away from everyone, and now people all over the world are reading it, and that's really fun.
And what is your process like? So you did it for NaNoWriMo, so you must have done that in the 30 days. Is that was from the time you got the idea for Furious to having it published? What was that process like?
So I had the idea probably 6 months before. This was like a couple years before the pandemic, and I don't remember. I read a lot of nonfiction too, and I remember reading something just about. I was thinking how fragile. Like I spent a career in with transnational criminals and terrorists and just really horrific people. People, sitting down to dinner with someone who's murdered 300 people. Like it's a weird kind of professional background. And I remember thinking how like our society is so nice. and so safe and so secure and just historically wealthy, right? And the things that we have, even from 20 years ago, our lives are so much better in so many ways. And I remember just thinking like how fragile it really is, and the actual, just the line between life and death is really small. And for most of human history, people were constantly fighting on a daily basis to survive. And now they don't have to do that, and so you can be upset about smaller things. And I was wondering what would happen. Like what kind of event could trigger our supply lines to collapse? What would happen to society as we know it if you can't pick up the phone and dial 911 and have the police at your house in 5 minutes? If that didn't exist, what would it look like? And so I was thinking about, I wonder if a pandemic, came across the globe. This is 2018. And then so it got me thinking, like, how would I escape? I'm in Old Town Alexandria, which is just outside of Washington, D.C. And I was thinking the best way to get out, if things really collapse with rioting and murders, it would be to get on a boat. Because I love sailing. And then I was thinking, what if somebody on the boat was a problem? And so what if somebody was infected on the boat with me? So that got me thinking about the closed setting kind of thriller. And then I'm a big outliner. So I outlined it the month before Nano. And then the goal for Nano is 50,000 words in 30 days. And I wrote the whole first draft. I think it was around 70,000 words. And then I expanded it a little bit after that. And then when I'm editing, it's 250 pages now. I think it's like 62,000 words. So it's a pretty quick read.
And how would you describe your books to listeners not familiar with your work?
So they're thrillers. All the books are thrillers. I do have a nonfiction book called Blood and Powder, which my agent is trying to shop to publishers now. And that's about my personal journey from being at the World Trade Center at 9/11 all the way to pushing my agency into counterterrorism and getting into the first narco-terrorism case. So I think it's interesting, and it reads like a thriller. So I'll count that as a thriller too, even though it's nonfiction. But everything else is nonfiction. I've written several novels now, and they're all in the process of editing or with my agent or with beta readers. So I'm hoping to have, I have 2 more ready to go. So I'm hoping to have them come out fairly soon too, as soon as my beta readers get done with them. But they're all different subgenres, which I think is probably a mistake, especially for a new author. The demographics I'm seeing from my Facebook ads are my readers of Furious are like 70% women, and it's mostly, or the majority are like women over 40 and up. So I don't know if that same audience will come with me for my next book, which is, Unseen, which is it's a political crime thriller that takes place in Washington, D.C. So it's different enough that I don't know if the same readers will find that. And then the book that one of the books my beta readers are going over now is Shaking. And that's like a small town murder mystery that takes place in the town I grew up in, Massachusetts, Harvard, Massachusetts. And so that's another subgenre, right? So I am going to have to settle down here. I have for this last Nano in the fall, I wrote a techno thriller, The Forever Game. It's about life extending technology, and it's with an agent, but they're all thrillers. They've all got violence in them. They're all fast paced, so I'm hoping to keep at least a core audience. And then sometime later this year, I'm going to start my first series about a special agent chasing transnational criminals and terrorists around the world, which might sound familiar to you.
Yeah. So these are all so far your books that you've written so far are like standalones, and so now you're gonna
right. They're all standalones. I actually wrote after I did Furious. There was a Camp NaNoWriMo in like March of 2019, I think, and I did write 50,000 words of a sequel. The problem was the plot was a pandemic, and then of course I didn't finish it, and I was working on other things. And by the time I got around to it, the actual pandemic hit, and I don't know about anybody else, but I don't want to read anything about pandemics right now. In my next book, Unseen, the crime thriller, the protagonist is a rookie detective, Malachi Wolf, and I love the character. He's really interesting character, and so I do have 3 possible sequels for it. And so it could be a series. I intend on writing the next one, so there'll be at least one more, and then we'll just see how it does, and if people are liking it, I'm on it. If it's not. But I do love the character, and so I'm hopeful that it deals with Islamic terrorism and infiltration and a lot of like real issues that exist that a lot of people don't know about. And my wife happens to be an expert in that area. She's one of the world's leading experts on the Muslim Brotherhood and Islamic terrorism. So I've used her a lot for that book.
Oh yeah, it's a good source to have right nearby.
Yeah, it's nice to just be able to walk out of my office and ask one of the world's leading experts. She's got a book coming out called The Secret Apparatus. Post Hill Press is going to publish that in March, and it's a nonfiction book about the Muslim Brotherhood, and it'll be the first comprehensive, it's filled with, I think it's got 150 or something, some ridiculous number of things that have never been reported in the West before. And my wife's Egyptian; she grew up in Cairo. And she's talked to the top defectors from the Muslim Brotherhood, and she's talked to some of the top terrorists. She was on Al Qaeda affiliated hit lists. She had to flee to the United States because she formed the first secular pro-Western political party in Egypt, and she actually had to flee for her life. One of her friends was killed, and she would for years, for I think it was like a decade, she had calls all through the night with people threatening to decapitate her and do horrible things to her. And the government told her they were coming for her, and she kind of pushed it as far as she could. So she fled to the U.S. on asylum back in 2011. Well, I guess for me. So thank you, Muslim Brotherhood.
Yeah, that's scary stuff. Yeah, I like it. Yeah, you mentioned your nonfiction book that you're shopping now. That sounds fascinating. And you're right. You're so right. Those true crime books, kind of like the Killing Pablo, they do read like a thriller. So it's kind of scary.
Yeah, and I love Mark Bowden.
Yeah, I love that. Killing Pablo. It's a great book. Was that how was it for you that were actually in the DEA? Was that pretty? How was the accuracy of books? Like when you're reading fiction books, how do you suspend the disbelief because you actually were in there for 25 years?
Yeah, we all love stories, right? All readers and writers. So it's, I try to suspend the disbelief. And when, I obviously things pop up like red flags when I see them that are absolutely wrong or could never happen. And that's in most books that I read, but I try to just kind of skim over it because I'm enjoying the story. And really, like in Furious, it takes place on a boat. And I'm just terrified. I'm a sailor. Like I grew up on like little sailfish, and I had some blue water sailing experience, and I sail Flying Scots on the Potomac now. But I'm not like an expert sailor. I'm an amateur, and I'm just terrified that I'll make some technical mistakes in the book, and then people who are big sailors will be all upset about it. It's like when somebody who's not in law enforcement makes a mistake about firearms, and everyone who's an enthusiast gets all crazy about it. So, I listen. Everyone makes mistakes in their books, so I just try to skim over it. The problem is like when the plot itself is flawed, like when they have the CIA doing something the CIA is, legally prohibited from doing and would never do. And, people doing things in action that just physically could not happen. And, so that if it's too much at some point, I lose interest. But, I'm pretty forgiving with that stuff. And I'm hoping my readers will be too.
And so how much research do you do before you start get down to write a book? Do you put in a lot of research into them?
Yeah, a bit. Like with Furious, it's this woman who loses right at the beginning. She's lost her infant child, and she's in this horrible depression, and she's about to lose her job as a pediatric surgeon, which was her lifelong dream. And she doesn't know what to do. So her husband decides to take her on a sailing cruise from Bali to the Maldives, across the Indian Ocean, just the two of them on the 62-foot sailboat. And she has a fear of the water, but she knows that she has to do something or she's not going to be able to go on. And so they get on this boat, and she has a lot of self-reflection and starts to feel better. And then horrible things happen, and it's actually got a real, like some people have said it, the setting is similar to like Dead Calm.
Oh yeah. So I was thinking Nicole Kidman. Yeah.
Yeah, right. But there's a huge twist in this. Like it's completely different what the actual plot turns out to be. So I keep, for the first third of the book, I keep readers kind of guessing what actually the big problem is going to be, because there are a lot of potential problems that crop up. And then, but it's a fast read. I mean, I'm getting really terrific views, which I'm so happy and so humbled to receive. But to answer your question, when it came time for the sailing, portions, because they're in storms and things, I did research a little bit just to make sure I was using the right terminology and to make sure the right techniques and everything. And hopefully I didn't make too many mistakes. When I'm doing law enforcement, like I don't know if you've heard of it, but this summer, Amazon's coming out with Amazon Vela. It's a new serial platform, and I've never written serials before. It's sort of episodic, where everyone ends on a cliffhanger, and they're a little shorter, and it's meant to be, you can read it on your computer, but a lot of people like around the world read it on their iOS devices. So I'm doing that, and I'm writing a military thriller just to try, like a novella, just something pretty short. I'm about halfway into it, and I hope to launch that in July. but for that, it's a military thriller. So the reader expectations are more technical information about weapons and combat and things. So I've been in combat, so I can write about the feelings. And, I carried and I slept with an M4 for like 10 years. So, I understand the weapons. I've fired, grenade launchers at the enemy. I've had rockets going over my head and bullets, snapping in the air by my ear. So I have the experience where I can talk about all that stuff, which is good. But I always research just to make sure I have like the specifications correct. I'm not as technical as like a Tom Clancy who goes deep into the technology, but I want to put enough in there for people who like the genre so they know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, and what do you do? What do you use to write your books? Do you use like Word or use another software program?
I am a huge fan of Scrivener.
Yeah,
I started using it a few years ago, and I just love it. I'm a big outliner, so like for people who've used it before. On the left, you have like an outline with basically it's basically a bunch of Word documents, but organized for you. So each chapter is a folder, and then each scene within it's a box, a text document. And so you're able to drag scenes around. You're able to do global searches and changes. Scrivener allows you to put all your research into it, which is fun. So I can put links to sites and pictures, and it has like character arc sheets. So, you can pull up all the data on your characters. So you don't have to, you don't have to keep like going back through your document to find out what color eyes this guy or something like that. So it's really helpful. If you're not an outliner, it's probably not as useful, but it's just a great way to organize it. And also they have it's like a cork board. I think that's what they call it. And you can basically, like you would have like a bulletin board with 3x5 cards on it with all your chapters. You can view it in that way, so you can see all your chapters. And so I don't know, it's a digital version of the way people used to do it by spreading out 3x5 index cards on the floor of their living room.
Yeah, a lot cleaner.
Yeah, it's cleaner, and it can travel with you. It's on your laptop, so I love it. I'm a huge fan of Scrivener. I've even done some shorter works in Scrivener.
And
I use a Pro Writing Aid as editing software. And I'll also run it through Word, through spell check on Word too. Like the nice thing about Scrivener is you can download it into any format. So like every day at the end of the day, I'll save my document as a Word document and I'll email it to myself. And I'm kind of OCD with this, and I have a thumb drive, and I'll put it in the thumb drive, and it's backed up on the cloud and on a hard drive. You only have to lose something you've worked really hard on one time to be crazy about backing up your data.
Yeah. I really like Pro Writing Aid, and it integrates very nicely with Scrivener. So that's I just discovered that feature recently. I was like, oh, this is awesome.
Yeah, it's fantastic. It does a really good job. And, obviously like not all the suggestions are accurate, and it's still software,
yeah,
but it helps and it catches a lot.
Yeah. It cleans it out before you send it out to human editors or whatever. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And then I count on my editors at Black Rose Writing to catch everything else.
Yeah. And so what does a writing day look like for you? Do you have do you try to do set hours? Do you have word count goals when you're writing a project?
Yeah, I just sort of write out of desperation. I went so many years without being able to write because I had the highest security clearance you can have. And, I was traveling around the world all the time and in these austere environments. And, I know it's always an excuse to say I don't have time to write. I did have time to write and I should have, but it was a kind of a crazy environment. Like I was in combat. I was in Afghanistan in these forward operating bases and things. So it was difficult. But now that I'm able to write, I'm just writing like crazy. So I've got, I want to get as much as possible. Now, if I get a reader who reads Furious and they're excited about it, I've had a lot of people comment, oh, I want to see what else he has, So I have a short story called The Interrogation that's on Amazon that I self-published just to kind of go through that process. And that's up there too. So those people are starting to buy that as well. But, I'd like to have, I have 3 more books that are just about ready to go that I'm hoping to publish next year. And I've got, I think my story list, right? Every time I get an idea, I flesh it out and write like a page synopsis. I think I've got 60 or 70 ideas for books that want to come. So my day is frantic. Like I'm just writing like crazy. And I'm sort of a morning guy. Like I'll drink a bunch of coffees in the morning and I try to write for, usually my limit's about 5 hours, but often it's only 4 hours, and that's when I find I start getting a little fried and what I'm creating isn't as good. So I try to write in the morning, and then I go for a run or a long walk. And then, and by the way, I've been dictating too, like on these walks, which is,
Oh yeah.
I don't know if anyone does it. It sounded horrible to me, but I use Dragon software and I dictate, and it's so good, especially for dialogue, because you're doing the two voices, and so that's been really helpful. So I actually, sometimes I'm more productive on my walk than I was sitting at my desk for 4 hours before that. And then as of late, for the last few months, I've just been doing the business of writing. Oh my God. Like, I'm with a small publisher. So, they are doing things. They're running Amazon ads for me. They were helping with reviews and things. But, you have so much you have to do as an author, even if you're with a big five.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
It's getting blurbs. Other authors, right? It's crazy. And get, sending out to places contests and reviews, and they're doing some of it. I'm doing some of it. I've been running my own Facebook ads, which I had to, learn all about that. I never thought like impressions and click rates and conversion ratios would matter to me. It's a whole different world. I've advertised in a couple sailing magazines, which I don't think have been that effective. I'm still waiting for some of the data to come in, but the Facebook ads certainly work.
Yeah, that seems to be Facebook ads seem to be very successful for a lot of people, especially independently. But you're so right about that, because I know a lot of aspiring writers listen to the show and say, "Well, I just want to write and find a public." Well, that's, even if you get a big contract, it's going to be, you're still going to have to do a lot of the elbow grease yourself into the marketing part.
Yeah, if you want, anyone can just write, but if you want people to read it, you have to help them get the book out there. And there was a New York Times article recently where they said the average. It wasn't even the average. I'd heard this years ago, but it's like something like the average big five published author sells 4,600 books, or it's under 5,000 books lifetime, right? And I'd heard that before, but I thought that was an average, and so you could get 50% of the people above that. But it turns out that's 95% of all authors who are traditionally published, and you get the 5% of the James Pattersons and all the big names, and everyone else is selling practically nothing. So it's hard. And so even, a lot of, especially I think post-pandemic or during the pandemic, even a lot of the publishers were supporting the backlists of the big authors, because if you're only selling 5,000 copies, they're probably not losing money on you, but they're not making money on you. It's got to be pretty close. And the average advance used to be, I want to say 15,000, and the average writer was not earning it out. So while the publisher, they're making more than the author, obviously, but maybe it's more of a wash with them, with all of their expenses and the salaries and, and all the staff that they have that's involved with it. So, if you're not out there helping to market and helping to sell, and the smaller your publisher, the more you have to do, right? Like my publisher doesn't have distribution, so I'm not in bookstores unless I call a bookstore and ask them if they want to carry it. So in that respect, the pandemic's been good, for not having to worry about that, but it's been terrible for bookstores, which I love. I could spend all my time in bookstores. I love spending an afternoon in a bookstore. So, so many more people are buying digital versions now, and that certainly helped people who are with smaller presses.
Yeah, and I was wondering, how are you going to, what are you planning to address the pandemic in the future in your books? Are you going to include it in there? Or are you going to do like alternative universe and ignore it?
Yeah, I'm just ignoring it. I mean, there's new strains and new variants, right, that are coming out internationally now, and so who knows what that will end up doing. But with the vaccines, I think people are getting back to normal. I was out for a walk yesterday, and I was the only person wearing a mask. I actually had long COVID. So I got it back in November or December, and I had breathing problems and just crushing fatigue, which I'm still suffering from a little bit, so it was brutal. But, so I haven't been able to get the vaccine because I didn't want to increase my symptoms. But I'm feeling well enough now where I think I'll get it very soon. But most people are vaccinated around me. So, you go out and life is sort of back to normal. So I think if you write a book where you're talking about people being masked up and the quarantines and things, I think it'll really date it. But also, I don't know that people want to read that. Why are people reading fiction? You can learn something and be taken to new places. And, everyone learns something probably from every book they read, but you're doing it because you want to escape. Yeah. And the last thing I want to do is read a book about pandemics and people dying.
Yeah, yeah. We read thrillers to get away from the real world.
Right, exactly. And to experience parts of the real world that you wouldn't otherwise be able to experience, right?
Hmm.
Like I can take somebody through combat and through chasing terrorist groups and these transnational criminals and give them a lot of inside information, about what it's like and what some of these criminals are like. It takes a certain kind of person to murder innocent women and children.
Hmm. I was wondering too. Now you were saying you're writing the serials for Vela. Do you find is it a big difference writing like a 60,000, 70,000 word manuscript versus a short story?
Yeah, I think short stories are very different, right? It's a very different art form. A lot of my friends are really talented short story writers, and I'm not. I like the short story, The Interrogation, that I have up on Amazon. That it's had good reviews, but that's not really my thing. I do prefer a novel
Mm.
length. Now the Vela, the serial stories, they each one you have to drop people right into the action, which is good even in a novel, of course, for chapters. But every chapter it's kind of like the pacing I use in my thrillers. Everything has to end on a cliffhanger. You have to keep the chapters moving, but they have to be a little more self-contained in a serial, right? So you think about it more like television episodes. You can have the C arc of the whole universe and the characters from the beginning to the end, like you do in a novel. But there has to be some resolution of something in each episode in a serial, or at least that's what they tell me. I've never done one before, but I'm on all the chat rooms, and I've been reading a lot of articles about it, and I've been writing it. So hopefully it's good. I think this will only end up being about 30,000 words, but I want to test the market. It's
Yeah.
huge in Asia and it's huge in other parts of the world. And this is Amazon's first foray into serials. So I mean, they're such a monster in the industry that I think they're poised, if they wanted to become the number one place. So it's probably a good time for authors, if they're interested in writing serials, to get in there.
Yeah, you have to come back when your serials when you start publishing those on Vela. It'll be interesting to see how that all pans out.
Yeah, I'm interested too. you know,
Yeah.
if nobody's reading it, and it's a female protagonist, but it's a military thriller. So I don't know if the people who are going to be reading this on their phones, and I think it's a younger demographic, and it's more women than men. And I just don't know about which subgenres. I know like romance and fantasy are really big in serials in some of these other countries. I don't know if that'll be the same here. But if it's not, I can always take it down and self-publish it as a novella. Because I think it's good. I think the character's good. I think the story's interesting. It's about a female medic who's, as the U.S. is pulling out of Afghanistan, who's presumed dead and left behind. So
Mm.
she's in on the border with the tribal territories in Pakistan, and she's got to try to find her way home while the Taliban is pursuing her.
Oh, yeah, that sounds pretty cool. And so I always like to ask my guests advice for aspiring writers that are listening to this. What would you tell them?
I guess I would say write and don't make excuses. You just have to get a first draft done. I completely silence my critic when I do the first draft. I go for word count. I try to write 2,000 words a day. Just get it on paper, then you can edit it later. And it might take me 6 weeks or something to finish like a novel. 4 to 6 weeks, but then I spend months, 3 or 4 months editing it, and then it goes through my critique group and beta readers and then editors. Right, so it but just get one. You can't do anything until you get the story on paper. And I find by writing quickly and you're able to see the whole arc. You're able to keep the mood and the theme, as opposed to some people who you can continually edit one chapter for the rest of your life, because every
Yeah.
time you write something, you're better when you finish than when you started. So I'll go back and I'll read something that I wrote like 6 months ago, and I'm like, oh no, right?
Oh, yeah.
Because I'm a better writer. So that never ends. It's a
Yeah.
Sisyphean task. So at some point you just have to say, okay, here it is. So get the first draft out and then edit. And the other piece I would say is learn the craft.
Mhm.
I always considered myself a writer, but when I first started back in 2017, I was awful. And it wasn't that I didn't have good descriptions and things. I was just doing all the rookie mistakes, lots of passive sentences and, you know, uh, just, characters naming each other in dialogue and all that kind of stuff. And I get former law enforcement officers all the time on like LinkedIn who will call me and say, hey, I'm writing a book. And I'll say, send me the first 5 pages or whatever. And I can always see the same mistakes. But by the way, I made all of them, like every single one you could imagine I made. And I'm sure I'm still making some, but I'm much better than I was when I started. So I would say read all the craft books, listen to podcasts like this, and learn the craft itself, because a lot of agents and editors will only read the first couple of paragraphs. And if they see a couple rookie mistakes in there, they're done. You're starting with backstory or one of the million things, they're done. So that's something you just learn not to do. And it's pretty easy to do. So I read probably a craft book every couple of months, and I've been doing that for years. And it's really helped me. I've been learning from the mistakes of the masters, which is the way to do it.
Yeah, no need to reinvent the wheel.
Exactly.
Yeah. So what's the best place for the listeners to find you? Is on your website?
Yeah, I have a newly designed website. It was done by Zuni. It's jeffreyjameshiggins.com. JEFFREY James Higgins. Higgins is HIGGINS.com. And you can go there. You can see there are links to my short story, to my current novel that's out there. You can read excerpts and praise and blurbs, that kind of thing. And my new books that are coming out there, you can read about them as well. And I have a lot of media appearances, especially a lot of things I did related to terrorism are up there too. So I hope people go, and you can sign up for my newsletter. And once a month I send out a newsletter, and once a month I send out a recent blog update. So you'll get two emails a month, but you'll know whenever I'm publishing something.
All right. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jeffrey. It was great talking to you. And Furious is out now, so people should go check that out.
Always fun to talk about writing. I could do this for all day.
Yeah. Thank you for listening to Meet the Thriller Author. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with one of your favorite writers of mysteries and thrillers. Or if this episode's guest is new to you, I hope you give their books a chance. Helping listeners discover new authors and books is one of the coolest outcomes of doing this podcast. As always, you can head over to thrillerauthors.com to sign up to my Thrilling Reads email list. That way you won't miss out on any great deals in thriller and mystery books. You can also check out all the links and resources in the show notes for this episode over at thrillerauthors.com. And also please do subscribe to this podcast if you haven't done so already, and leave a rating and review wherever it is that you're listening to this show. If you have done that already, I thank you. I really do appreciate your support. For my other links to my author website, social media haunts, and more, check out thrillingreads.com/links. All my links will be on that page. So that's it for this episode. See you next time, and stay safe out there.